Thank you everybody for joining us today as we experiment with this Instagram Live in Child Safety Week. I'm Jo Myers, I'm the Operations Manager for Children's Burns Trust, and I'm absolutely delighted to be hosting this Instagram Live, she says, as part of Child Accident. As part of Child Accident Prevention Trust Child Safety Week. What a great week we're having so far, seeing all this fabulous information about keeping our children safe. I previously worked as a burns nurse for 35 years, and I've seen far too often the distress a burn injury causes to a child and to their family, and the ongoing implications that burn injury can have when it could so easily have been avoided. I'm joined today in our chat by Chrissy Stiles, who I hope is there in the background somewhere, who's a burns nurse specialist at King's College Hospital, and she's an ambassador for Children's Burns Trust, particularly passionate about burns prevention and first aid, and often seen on social media supporting all the prevention messages and first aid messages. Sue Boseman, who might give a wave. Sue's an advanced nurse practitioner at St Andrew's Burn Service in Chelmsford, and on a day-to-day basis is looking after children and adults who've had a burn injury. And Katrina Phillips, really pleased that she can join us today because she's having a really busy week, who is the Chief Executive for the Child Accident Prevention Trust. I'd like to welcome all of you to the chat today about preventing burn injuries and the absolute importance of the correct first aid should a burn injury happen. We'd like you to drop us your questions. We're hoping that we'll be able to see them and cover them. If for any reason we don't, as this is the first time we've done a live, then please feel free to send direct messages through to Child Accident Prevention Trust or the Children's Burns Trust, and we'll look at posting responses to questions afterwards. We'd also love your feedback about this event today, because we like to experiment and we just need to know that it's working for our audiences. So, on to the topic. Shockingly, as we know, thousands of children and young people go to their GP or to an A&E department every year with a burn injury. Last year, 7,700, big number, of children were admitted to a specialist burn service with a severe burn injury. It's just an awful figure to think that so many children have had to go to a specialist unit far from home for the care of a burn injury. Half of those children were under 2. And again, the thing that sort of hits home is that very often these injuries happen when a parent and a carer is right there with the children. An accident happens in the blink of an eye. Imagine 30 children, toddlers, a burn every day. If you imagine a classroom of children, that's all of them going to with a burn injury. And I think it's just unbelievable. It's a visible indication that I think we can all relate to. So it's really important that we continue to talk about prevention and think about what we can do to keep our children safe. I know that this causes a lot of problems, and I'm going to come to Sue in a minute and she's going to tell us why this mug of tea is such a risk to young children. So Sue, thanks for joining us today. Can you tell us, based on the stats and everything, why do so many children under 2 get burns?
Well, that age group, the kind of under 2s, they're developmentally, they're just growing and changing every day. They do everything at speed. They're learning to explore, they're climbing, they're always under your feet. That's a bit of a recipe for disaster, as well as being a very exciting age. And so, you know, as you say, accidents happen literally in front of your eyes. they're taller than you think, and you pop a cup of tea up on the side, you think it's high enough, but they can just reach on their tippy toe, bring it down. And as you say, a small cup of tea could actually put a child into intensive care if they pull that fluid over them. So it literally happens in front of your eyes. Kitchen, the most dangerous part of the house for toddlers, and it's ever so tempting when they're miserable because they're hungry to have them tucked under your arm whilst you're cooking in the kitchen, or running around your feet. And it's so easy then for spills and trips to happen and cause injuries.
So, and oh, sorry, Katrina.
Oh, I was just going to ask Sue, because I as people in my team know, I am a great tea drinker. So I'm picturing my kitchen now, and I've got my kettle very safely pushed to the back of my worktop.
Well
but
done.
I'm now thinking, when I'm making my mugs of tea, like that one, I have them all lined up, all black, on the edge of my kitchen work surface, and then I turn away and I open the fridge door to get the milk out. Like, is that like a common scenario?
Absolutely. We see children with those kind of injuries every day. 2, 3, 4 children coming to the unit every day with that kind of injury. And because they're reaching up and they're always that little bit taller, they're pulling it down and it's falling onto their face or down their chest and causing horrible injuries. And the key really is to be extra careful, push those mugs right to the back of the surface. But remember that children do climb, and they often use things like the oven door to climb onto to get up to reach them. Black tea is very hot. It's not got the milk in yet to cool it down, and it's a very, very common injury. People often leave their tea on the table as well. Children climb up onto chairs to get to the table. So it's really just being extra vigilant about keeping all hot things, high surfaces away from children. And ideally, if you can do, to put a child gate, a baby gate across the kitchen doorway, and make a rule: no children in the kitchen when you're cooking or preparing food. Keep them behind the stair gate. You can still chat to them, you can still see that they're safe, but they're much safer behind there than they are under your feet or in your arms whilst you're making a drink. And never be tempted. Some people like to just pop them on the kitchen surface beside them, sit them down on the kitchen surface beside them, and they can reach. And hot hobs stay hot for a very long time. Oven doors are very hot for a long time, and injuries happen so quickly.
Yes. So, I mean, it's just scary, isn't it? It really is scary to think of the dangers, just so real. And just when we're going about what we do every day, in the blink of an eye, you know, as you say, Katrina, you turn to get the milk, and then that accident's happened. What other sort of dangers are there in the house or the garden for children, so that you see sort of injuries presenting to the service?
So again, things like hair straighteners, we see lots of injuries from hair straighteners. Either they've stepped on or picked up. Again, they stay hot for a long time, as do irons. So keeping those kind of things right out of the way, even once they're switched off, because they do stay hot. Actually, now that the sun's starting to shine, we see more accidents in the garden. Our burn of the moment in the last week, because it's been school holidays, has actually been marshmallows, melting marshmallows.
Really?
People are being super careful about the fire pit and being really careful about that, but the hot marshmallow is very sticky and burns to the mouth and to the face and to the hands from hot marshmallows. We've seen 3 in the last week whilst it's been holidays. Similarly, things like disposable barbecues, if you have them on the sand or on the mud, when you move them away and go to put them somewhere safe, the ground where they've been stays hot for a very long time, as does the edge of the barbecue. If you've used a barbecue, always have somebody ready, standing beside. If you're doing a barbecue, allocate somebody to be on kiddie watch to keep an eye on the children that are running around in the garden. Remember that even if you've had a fire pit from the day before, the hot ashes and the ground can still be hot the next day. So wearing shoes in the garden, being very careful about those hot ashes the next day is incredibly important too. Slides, the metal part of the slide gets very hot, so protecting children's skin if they're going down the slide, and pavements as well can really heat up. So some of the things that you wouldn't necessarily think of can, you know, in your day-to-day lives, can actually do quite a lot of damage. It's like having eyes in the back of your head.
So I was just going to ask, is it because, I mean, is their skin more delicate than ours? Is that part of the problem? Because I'm thinking some of those things we as grown-ups might not get so badly burnt, but you're talking about really serious injuries, aren't you?
Yes, yeah, they do. Children, their skin is still forming. It's thinner than ours, so it injures much more easily. The plus side is it actually heals much quicker than adults, but it does injure more easily. In the same way that if they're exposed to the sun, they can get sunburn much more quickly than an adult can, because they haven't had as much exposure. They haven't got as much protection in their skin. So yes, their children are very much more vulnerable than adults to injury.
Okay.
I was just going to, I interestingly got a few stats here, and it is scary. We had a look, and last year, 99 children were admitted to burn services with a barbecue-related injury, and 43 with a burn from a garden fire or bonfire. And one of those children had a life-threatening severe burn injury of over 30% of their body, which, I mean, it just doesn't bear thinking about, does it? You know, for the sake of being a bit more cautious, thinking about protection, thinking about wearing shoes. I mean, it's a simple thing, isn't it? Wearing shoes, and just being sort of more careful as we set about garden fires and things. I mean, the use of accelerants and that just are really scary, aren't they, when you've got children around? So we have to be so careful. I'm going to see if Chris is there, because I still can't see her. Chrissy, are you with us? Oh, that's good. I don't know. I haven't got the privilege of being able to see you. So in the interest of time, I'm going to see if we should move over to you, recognising that we can try and prevent these burn injuries from happening. But as we can see from the statistics, we know that sadly burn injuries do continue to happen, no matter how careful we try and be, because it is in the blink of an eye. So, Chrissy, can you tell us what the correct first aid is when a burn injury happens?
When a burn injury happens, like we discussed, it tends to be within our homes, most frequently around our safe spaces. First thing to do is to stop the burning process, and by that we tend to mean that remove the child, the injured person, away from the heat source. So whether that's removing their clothing that's actually had hot liquid spilt onto it, or just if it's flame, obviously stop, drop and roll to extinguish the flames first. So you need to stop the actual burn from continuing to happen. And then obviously removal of any additional jewelry or nappies near the burn is really important, because you don't know what's strapped under it, and skin tends to swell up very quickly as a normal response to a burn injury. And then the first thing to do would be to cool the burn. And cooling the burn will take you 20 minutes at least, and that's what you should dedicate your time to. And it will seem like an absolute age, like a lifetime, but it's so important to do at least 20 minutes of cooling. Once you've done the cooling, you can wrap the burn injury either in cling film straight from your kitchen, or a clean cloth will do it perfectly fine as well, just to cover it, because if the burn injury is uncovered, it can sting and can hurt. So just to relieve that distress. And then call for help, because if it's any bigger than 50 pence piece, then obviously that needs medical attention. So call for help. Check it out by medical professional, but cooling is quite essential.
That's brilliant, Chrissy. And the other thing, I mean, we hear all those sort of tales and horrors of things that are put on burns that aren't cold water or cool water. What sort of things have you come across that we know we should avoid, and it's probably good to chat about those?
Yeah, absolutely. And just historically, I was brought up in Eastern Europe, where lard was frequently used as if you got injured as a child, your parents would get a jar of lard, start putting it on, because that was believed to be the first aid. And of course, none of that is. Nothing that you can find in your kitchen cabinets, in fact, is first aid. So edibles like milk or butter, frozen peas, toothpaste, definitely no. Even some of the creams that might say on the lid of it that it's for burns and minor injuries, like Sudocrem. for example, is not a good idea to put anything like that on top of the burn injury, because it's not considered first aid. And the aim of first aid is to try and reduce the heat in the skin and try to reverse some of the damage that the burn injury has caused. And only water cooling will do that, 20 minutes cooling after the burn injury has occurred. So nothing that we find in our kitchen cabinets will do that.
Christy,
No.
can I ask? So I'm sort of thinking, is it you've got your 18-month-old and they're screaming out in pain? What water sources are we talking? In the shower? In the kitchen sink? I'm trying to sort of picture it in my mind. What do I do with this screaming little one?
Absolutely. First thing is to keep a cool head. Quite often what we find, as we discussed, the burn injuries happen at home with very easy access to running water. And whether that is a sink or a shower or a bath, it's readily available to us. But children are distressed. You as a parent are emotionally connected to that child. You will also be distressed, and both of you will be crying. So just take it as given that will happen. But the most important thing is to get them under a running water source. So for me, especially with the age population we're talking about, often under 2 years old, the easiest thing is for parents to get into the shower with the child together, because then you can give a cuddle at the same time as you're doing the cooling as well. So cooling with a shower directly over the burn injury itself. You can even put a hand directly over the shower so that the shower doesn't seem so powerful directly onto the painful wound. We know that a lot of parents will start first aid, but because of the distress of the child or the concern that they might hurt the child further by doing cooling, they stop. So a lot of emergency departments will see kids who are presented with wet clothing still attached to their burn injury, where the parents have started and then halted and didn't do the full 20 minutes cooling. So it's really important to, once you've started, to finish the 20 minutes cooling if you can.
Can I ask another question? Because I was thinking about what Sue was saying about, say, the barbecue on the beach and that little foot that goes onto the really hot sand. What happens if you're not in the home and you want to do that cooling? How long have I got before, there's not much use doing that cooling
That's
first
a
aid?
very good question. And in fact, the delay can be anywhere up to 3 hours for the first aid to be effective. Of course, it's best as soon as possible. So if you are somewhere where you're not near the source of running water, somebody might have a bottle of water, for example, and you can use a clean cloth, a scarf, somebody's t-shirt, pour the water onto that and place it onto the burn wound. So you still have something that's cool on there, but ultimately you have up to 3 hours to get that child, to get that person who's injured to the source of running water. So there is still time for that first aid to be effective. So don't lose heart, and definitely don't not do first aid.
Yeah, that's brilliant advice. It really is. Sue, I was just thinking, we focus very much on young children and safety in the house and the garden. What about school-age children and teenagers? What sort of injuries have you been seeing in those age groups in the last sort of 6-12 months?
So that kind of age group, they're starting to be a bit more independent, and so they still have the same dangers in the kitchen, but often they're doing, so for instance, we see a lot of pot noodle injuries where older children are pouring boiling water from the kettle into a pot noodle. Very simple, quick and easy thing to make that can be, can cause quite a nasty injury. Teenage girls, if they have period pain, are often filling up hot water bottles. Hot water bottles, not just from the heat of the hot water going into them, can cause damage, but also the actual bottle itself when the rubber heats up, and if you hold it against your skin for too long, it can cause quite a nasty contact burn. So it's much better to use the you can get like microwavable oat packs you can put in the microwave. They still get hot as well, so you still need to be careful, but you've reduced the risk of that hot water. Older teenagers are getting into the risk-taking behaviours, so things like smoking, messing around with fires, so flame burns, fireworks. Unfortunately, it's quite easy to access fireworks. So we see quite a lot of firework injuries, unfortunately, in older children that are more taking risk-taking behaviours. But same kind of injuries, but also some different ones as well as they grow, as they start to become more independent and take more risks.
Yeah, and there's been some crazy sort of crazes that have taken sort of fashion, haven't there? Which again, I know have caused some problems. The Squid Game.
Yeah, absolutely. Access to social media can be really positive, and like
Yeah.
today can be really helpful. But also, there are some things out on social media that children have access to, which become crazes and can cause damage through burns, unfortunately. And we do need to be vigilant and aware of what our older children are accessing online.
I think you're right, absolutely. Katrina, we've heard some really important information about preventing burn injuries and the correct first aid. Why is it so important that we keep talking about this?
I think because parents really are taken by surprise, and you know what Sue was saying about, you know, they're under your feet. You're looking after them, and so quickly that accident happens. And I think if you can't picture those potential accident scenes in your head, and you don't understand how much thinner and more delicate their skin is than ours, you won't necessarily know how important it is to put that mug safely out of reach. And they are at that stage where they're doing something new every day, and it's wonderful. But it also, those developmental milestones, they also bring risk because of everything else that they can now do. So I think it's just so important to understand what the risks are, to understand how we can prevent them, and to really get that message out, to share it as widely as we can with family and friends and colleagues, with parents that we're working with, because everyone needs to know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing which quite alarming, I think, for us to realise is that data that certainly I know we've looked at in the last 8 years shows that twice as many children living in what would be determined as deprived areas are sustaining burn injuries. Why do you think this is, and what can we do to try and help this group of children to be more safe?
I mean, I think we know that generally children from families where there's less money, where they're living in smaller, more overcrowded homes, are more likely to be burnt, more likely to suffer other injuries as well. There's just less space. You've got a narrow galley kitchen and the little one is running through it. There's just less space for everybody. And I think it is for people who are working with families in those situations, it really is about working alongside them, sharing the safety messages, looking at the practical things that they can do, because we know every parent wants to keep their child safe, but some people face barriers in doing that. And I think there's a lot that people can do, and that's partly what Child Safety Week is about. It's all about helping people with free resources, with advice in translation, to be able to get those safety messages out to the parents who need it most.
Yeah, I think absolutely some really important messages there for us to be thinking about, reaching out to some of the more vulnerable groups where it is difficult to get these messages to. Chrissy, are there any sort of tips you've got around that first aid message? I don't know if your experience has given in any insight into how we reach some of these more vulnerable groups.
I think Katrina pointed it out that it is quite often not the lack of resource, not the ability to do first aid, but sometimes it's the lack of knowledge. And actually, our data does suggest that children that come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are less likely to receive first aid, and children under 2 are even less so. And in fact, when we look at the numbers of who gets first aid, only a third of children will get first aid at the scene at the time of their injury. And that it's not just the parents, it's not just the non-clinical providers, it's also the clinicians who will then attend to that child. So say the paramedics or emergency departments are also, only a third of them are likely to deliver first aid to the child that arrives into their hands. Same for general practitioners. So we know that there is generally a lack of knowledge as to the importance of first aid. And I know we talk about splashing some water for 20 minutes. Why does it really matter? But actually it means that the burn injury is less deep. It's less big. It needs surgery. Well, it's less likely to need surgery. It's less likely to scar. And the child is less likely to stay in hospital for long. So there are so many connotations and reasons why splashing water for 20 minutes is actually a really good idea.
And just remind us again, Chrissy, that water should be what temperature and for how long?
The water temperature should be as warm as the child will tolerate. So it doesn't need to be icy cold at all. So we're doing 20 minutes of cool running water within 3 hours of injury. And if you don't have running water, cold water onto the cloth, onto the burn wound, and just keep changing that cloth every 5 or so minutes for a total block of 20 minutes. So we're always doing 20 minutes cooling within 3 hours of burn injury.
That's brilliant. Thank you. I'm conscious of time. We've been chatting for half an hour, and it's been great to catch up. I think it's just so important to continue to talk about prevention and first aid of burn injuries. Trying to prevent one more accident is so important. Katrina, could I come to you and just ask for your sort of final conclusions and maybe to close our chat today?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd really like to thank Children's Burns Trust for hosting this event, and our brilliant expert chatters along, because I mean I've learned things today that I didn't know, and I think it's really been fabulous, and I really hope that everyone who's been watching live will go out and share what they've learned. I also want to say we're recording, so this live will be, the recording of it will be posted out to all of our channels. So if you want to share it with colleagues, we'd love you to do that. Or if you came in midway through and missed the beginning, you don't have to miss out. I'm also going to say a date for your diaries for the autumn: National Burn Awareness Day on the 12th of October. We will be supporting the Children's Burns Trust. So I also really want to thank Lee Day, who are one of our corporate patrons, and it's thanks to their generous sponsorship that we were able to bring you this event today. So thank you so much for that. And final thing to say is Child Safety Week continues until the end of the weekend. We have got loads of free resources for you to download from our website. We've got fact sheets, we've got advice in translation, we've got a poster, we've got a parents pack, there's a session plan so that you can run a little mini discussion session with parents on burns prevention and first aid. So do visit, do download, do share, because we need to stop children from suffering what really can be life-changing injuries. And I think we've heard some really practical prevention advice and some brilliant first aid advice as well. So let's get out there and start sharing it with other parents and carers.
That's brilliant. I've seen some lovely comments coming in, so thank you for those. I haven't seen any questions, so I'm sorry if I've missed them, but thank you for your kind comments. It's been good to chat. Until the next time, I'm sure there will be one.
Yeah.
Bye.
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 Bye.